Hello, Professor. This is Mayna Alarcon, and for my group assignment, I met with Marcos de Mello, Alejandro Espinosa, Nelly Correa, and Aaron Mendoza. We met on October 15th, 22nd, and 29th for about an hour each. I was very excited to be able to meet some of my classmates and have real conversations with them. I miss being in class, so this was a really great opportunity to be able to do that. A couple of them at first seemed shy, but I was very impressed even within that first meeting of how one of them talked about their strength of creativity and how that didn't seem to make sense in their brain. They didn't really consider themselves a creative person, and yet as we spoke, they started thinking about how at their work they really serve as a person where people come and ask them questions for problems that they can't figure out, and that they're always able to really come up with a new solution and in ways that others haven't thought. And so that was really awesome to see them embrace that they are a creative person. And then another classmate surprised me with their very passionate words on equality and for opportunities and wanting a country that provides those things. As well as having another classmate talk about their strength of love of learning. And I remember thinking that I wish I had that higher on my strength list, because I know that sometimes I am not as motivated towards schoolwork or feeling overwhelmed by it. And so it was very a humbling experience to hear them talk about how their love of learning comes from being an immigrant and having to really work to be a university student, with English being their second language, and just going against their family norms. And so that was really inspiring and humbling to hear, and encouraging. And I realized that we all were either immigrants ourselves or children of immigrants, and I think that that really speaks towards continuing to hear and understand other people's life experiences and their points of view. Sometimes hearing these different experiences from others has left me feeling maybe insufficient to be someone that wants to help. And so at the same time, these conversations were really encouraging, and that my classmates all agreed that we are really just wanting to be there for each other to listen, and that everyone just needs someone that will support them and have an honest relationship with them. When we spoke about our articles, there was one member that really shared almost all the same topics that I had, and yet they really had something new to talk about on each one of them. So they spoke on police violence and brought up the fact that right now with the protests that have happened, how police play a role in how those protests, whether they become violent or not. And so talking about educating police on how to approach protests was really, I think, an undermined issue that's really important. And then another classmate brought up the unfairness of how we fund schools, and how that continues to have generational effects, racial effects, and geographical effects. And I plan to be a school social worker or counselor, and so I know that this exists, and yet instead of, I have the choice of going to neighborhoods that feel comfortable to me, that this inequality isn't as obvious, and yet this continues to impress on me that this is something that influences so many people, that needs to be reformed, that needs to be looked at. And although I don't consider myself a macro social worker, I could for the major concern that this issue presents. They also brought up the current issue of funding for schools when concerning attendance. Right now with the pandemic, this is a huge issue for our schools, and instead of putting our students and their families first, we're looking at the dollar sign and wanting to open up schools and then having to close again, and it's just making an unsafe environment. I hope to be a change maker in our school systems that fights against discriminatory and questionable systems. Two of my classmates also talked about current events in relation to the election. It was a reminder that this election was not a race in the sense of having a clear winner and a loser, but this influences and permanently affects people's lives. They talked about the children that have been lost to their families at the Mexican border, being unable to reunite them, and then we talked about international students leaving and going home and not wanting to return because of the hatred and racial slurs heard from President Trump. Before becoming a SDSU student, and even now, I admit that sometimes I hesitate to act or to have strong opinions on large controversial topics. And even though I may be a non-confrontational person, these conversations and being a social worker and being in these classes, they continue to push me to understanding that there is always a time and place to stand up for what provides justice for others. So I'm very grateful for these conversations and for becoming closer and being just continuing to be inspired and being support systems for my classmates. And I thank you for the time, Professor, that we've had and for the semester, and I thank you for listening to my talk.